Gordon here, Ionic Systems Australia. Just wanted to have a bit of time to do a bit of tech talk in relation to filters, where they're installed in your system. Ionic Systems have quite a vast amount of different systems, and some of the setups and the sequences that they're placed is slightly different, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview, and basically I wanted to talk about being proactive in your maintenance of your portable or van mounted equipment rather than reactive, because being reactive can often have consequences in relation to the price, where you're changing filters that shouldn't technically be required to be changed at the service point of that particular machine. So in any particular system, whether portable or van mount, depending on where you are in Australia, the first point of call will be a softening resin cartridge. So that softening resin cartridge will look very similar to this golden brown resin here, and we often install that in wall mount systems for statics or caddy systems for portable or van mounted. So predominantly used in harder water conditions. The objective of the softening resin is to remove calcium and lime. So removing the calcium and lime from your system has consequences in the performance of the RO, which we'll talk about. So that calcium and lime, if not removed in those harder water conditions, will predominantly block your RO filter and obviously reduce the long-term serviceability of that filter and reduce its filter life. So the softening resin looks very similar to this, a golden brown. Will generally last you around 5 years and is backwashed every 1,000 litres or 8 hours of use with a couple of cups of pool salt flushed through in the reverse direction, which will rejuvenate that resin ready for the next fill or the next use of your system. So after the softening filter, will then enter the system, whether it being portable or vehicle mounted. So the first point of call can change slightly, whether you're portable or vehicle mounted, but generally overall it's a carbon filter. So carbon is quite heavy, very black and dense. So that carbon filter is there. It will catch sediment coming through naturally, but its primary purpose is to remove chlorine. So chlorine will have consequences in relation to the reverse osmosis filter, in relation to burning holes within that filter. So if we don't pull the chlorine and we burn holes in your reverse osmosis filter, it will obviously not work the way it should. So after the carbon filter, generally we go into sediment filters, often bright white when they first go in. Will change to a coffee colour and then go to a dark brown as time goes on. So depending on where you are, your water coming in, Australia's TDS varies quite differently. We do have an aqua audit map on our website, which you can get a bit of an overview of water quality around Australia. Will determine also the frequency of changing the sediment filter. So like in a car, if we don't change the oil, the car will keep on going, the engine oil will solidify and will have consequences that we probably all won't like in relation to repair bills. So like changing filters, being proactive rather than reactive, it's nice to change the sediment filter. It's the cheapest filter in the Ionic system range, and quite a fine filter. I nickname it a rock catcher. It's a little bit more than that, but it's going to stop particulates going through your filter system and having consequences that you don't like. So we can definitely ask us about where you are in Australia, how often you should change this, and we can certainly help you out with that. So after it goes through a sediment filter, or depending on your system, a number of sediment filters, and after the carbon filter, it'll then enter the reverse osmosis filter. So if you haven't seen an RO filter, it's a mechanical filter built up of many different layers. So you can understand why a pumped system is more efficient with RO. The RO in itself is quite a fine filter, so depending on where you are in Australia, we'll probably do 95 to 98% of the work. And if your water's sort of 250, 300 TDS, we'd expect the water coming out of that RO to be anywhere from 5 to 10 TDS on a good RO. RO is obviously the most costly filter in the system. Will predominantly last for anywhere sort of 3 to 8 years, depending on where you are in Australia. More than just a wrap filter. They're wrapped and they're tested. So each filter has data that can be pulled in relation to serial numbers. So we can initially see off the test bench how that RO filter has performed when it was brand new, which is quite useful information. We can monitor that life as that filter goes along. So we can also test the water coming out of the bottom of the RO. So the water coming out of the bottom of the RO is the wastewater. So when we push water through the RO, water goes through the RO and around the RO. So that water going around the RO we call wastewater. And that wastewater will be at a higher TDS reading than the water coming in from your tap. So because it's trapping all the particulates and rejecting that to waste, which is washing away all those contaminants that would usually flow into your DI system or flow through that RO system. So very nice filter, works very efficiently, and will be your best friend as long as you look after it and try and be a bit proactive rather than reactive. We recently just did a service on a zero static system, which I had a bit of another chit chat Facebook post. It's just clicked through 15,800 hours and produced, I think, more than 5 million litres of water. Got a call, Zero's not producing any water, or very slow water production. Basically, it was 6,000 hours since our last service call. We pulled the filters and they were all totally blocked and coked. So the ongoing repercussions of that is they needed a full filter change. So it was a double RO system. So in relation to cost, with that filter change, it's going to be very costly for the consumer. Where if they were a bit proactive and had changed their sediment prior and stopped some of those contaminants going through, they could probably preserve their ROs in relation to longevity. So after the RO, the water, depending where you are, will come out at a certain TDS. If you're in soft water, it could even come out at 0 or 1 or 2 TDS. It'll then go into a DI filter. So the DI filter looks very, very similar to the filter I pointed at before. A golden brown resin coloured cartridge, or quick change cartridges. The DI is there to predominantly polish the water coming out of the RO. So the RO will do 95–98% of the work on average. It'll then enter the DI, which will do the polishing stage. So depending on where you are, that DI filter could produce you, anywhere from 30 to 60,000 litres of pure water, and even upwards of that if you're in softer conditions, 100–150,000 litres before you need to change that DI cartridge. So that'll depend on your operating conditions where you are. When DI goes bad, here we have what you see is a cooked DI cartridge. So it goes from a lovely golden brown to a dark chocolate coffee colour, and we often call that cooked. We all know when we change that DI resin, it'll stink. So if you're running a standalone complete DI non-RO system, the downfall with DI resin is there's a lot of chit chat on the net that I can clean windows up to 5, 10, 20 TDS without spots. When your DI does hit 1 or 2 TDS in a straight DI system, depending on your incoming water TDS, the amount of water production that you'll have after it does hit that 1 or 2 TDS could be 100–150 litres of water. So yeah, you can clean water maybe 1, 2, 5, 10 TDS without leaving spots, but as soon as it hits that 1 or 2, you really need to react, and you really need to be looking at changing your resin, because the TDS from a standalone DI system will rocket and move very, very quickly and give you results that you and your customer won't want. So from an RO perspective, you don't have to react like that. So RO water is stable. So as the life goes on, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, the water coming out of the RO will slowly increase. The DI will absorb it, but the DI does a minimal amount of work at that point in time. So when your water coming out of your system, and depending on whether it's portable, whether you're measuring the water coming out, or if you've got inboard TDS measuring the water at different stages, you don't have to react as quick. So you notice that you've had a change in your water coming out of your system into your van, and you might then pick up the phone, be reactive, say, Gordon, Ionic Systems, send us a DI cartridge, water started to move away, I don't have to react that quickly, I'll have one spare ready to change. So that's the way the RO system works, very, very stable. On our van mounts, we also have, on the Zero, we have nuclear grade DI. So after we make the pure water and drop that to as close to zero as we can, and when we talk zero TDS and measure it with a handheld TDS meter, it's a generic reading. So it's reading zero, it's close to zero, but generally in window cleaning terms, unless we've got fancy meters, we can't see the water, what the true reading is. So after we make the water with our Zero PPB system, which is technically in general chit-chat terms in the window cleaning industry, Zero TDS, the water goes into the tank, we pull the water out of the tank and we run it through our nuclear grade DI. That nuclear grade DI will refilter the pure water and drop that even closer towards that optimal zero mark, which we all aim to achieve, which is probably nearly impossible, but we get it as close as we can to that zero mark through that refiltration through the nuclear grade DI. On our Zero Systems PPB, we also have another filter, ultraviolet UV filter, so biological filter that's pulling contaminants and bugs out of the water as well, to drop that as close as we can to zero. So that on the Zero system, that's one of our first point of calls of water coming into the system. Like to know any more, get us on the up and coming road shows. We've got August, we're doing Brisbane, Canberra, very early August, Sydney, late Sydney, late in August we're doing ISSA, then we're doing Adelaide and Perth. Any more information, you'd like some information about or education about your system, when you should change filters or running costs, which are very minimal and should be minimal. Remember, proactive rather than reactive, and you'll get many years, 5, 10, 20 years out of your system. ionicsystems.com.au. Look forward to seeing you at the road shows, or you can always get us on the phone, as you know, 1300 88 4566. Cheers, thanks for watching, guys.